Can Desmond Ridder rebound at home against the Houston Texans? And will he get help from his run game? It's Crossover Thursday.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another Crossover Thursday here for the upcoming Week 5 matchup between the Atlanta Falcons and the Houston Texans. And today's Crossover Thursday episode is, as usual, brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. And we thank each and every one of you that is a subscriber and everydayer of the Locked On Falcons and Locked On Texans podcast here, that subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it's available. So if you guys don't know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, the humble host of Locked On Falcons, and I'm joined for this Week 5 crossover by Coty Davis, one half of the Locked On Texans crew. Shout out to my guy, John Hickman. Unfortunately, won't get the chance to talk to you today, but Coty, I'm sure you're going to be able to bring all that insight that the Falcon fans are listening to, and I know the Texans fans are very used to hearing each and every day on Locked On Texans. How you doing today?
Doing well, man. Houston Texans are 2-2, and look, I understand being 2-2 might not mean a lot to a couple franchise, but down here in the city of Houston, the sun is shining on this organization and on this city, and we are rejoicing. And look, the first 4 games of the regular season has been a blessing for the Houston Texans. That's all I gotta say. We are happy, we are smiling, we are celebrating.
Absolutely. And I feel like, we're going to talk about the biggest stories for each of these teams heading into this Week 5 matchup. And I know, at least from the outside, it seems like, a lot of people are looking at these two teams and kind of they're in two opposite places as far as their quarterback situation is concerned. C.J. Stroud has been lights out these last 2 weeks, getting some big wins against Jacksonville, against Pittsburgh, these last 2 games. And, meanwhile, Desmond Ridder ain't looking so hot his last 2 games. But I'm curious, Coty, what is sort of the big story for this Texans team heading into Week 5?
The biggest storyline, man, it's a variety of things and a variety of good things, which brings me to the realization the biggest storyline surrounding the Houston Texans is literally just positivity, something that this organization has not had since they beat the Bills in the wild card game in 2019. Now, we all know what happened in the next round, and that's part of the reason why we went on that downward spiral over the last 3 years. But for the very first time, man, it just seems like everything for the Houston Texans is starting to click. You already mentioned it. C.J. Stroud, this young man has looked phenomenal, by far the best rookie quarterback in the league. And some people might is saying, a top 10 quarterback in this league as of right now. When you take a look at the first 4 games of the regular season, this is a young man. He has already thrown for the second most yards for a rookie quarterback at 1,212 throughout the first 4 games. That is second only behind Cam Newton. And we all remember how well Cam Newton played throughout his rookie campaign. Aaron, Atlanta Falcons, NFC South. I'm pretty sure you guys remember. Yep. And C.J. Stroud has looked phenomenal. And the best part about C.J. has been his ability to literally just go through his reads quick. And not only that, taking care of the football. I remember doing training camp. C.J. Stroud, those first couple of weeks, it seems like taking care of the football was going to be a bit of a concern. And look, if we being 100, that's what you have. That's your biggest concern for any rookie quarterback. However, 4 games in, this young man has not only thrown for 6 touchdowns, but 0 interceptions. He hasn't thrown an interception. I think the last time he thrown an interception was during his very first drive, that preseason game against the New England Patriots, man. So the progression from C.J. Stroud has looked good. The coaching from the Houston Texans have been good, especially from the coordinators, especially from offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick. He has gotten this Houston Texans offense over the last 10 quarters. They have scored 77 points, which means that they finally have somebody that has this offense actually playing efficient. And that is something that we want to see. Even when you take a look at something that could be a detriment for this organization, which is injuries, which is the injuries to the offensive line. The offensive line has still found a way to, yes, they have allowed some pressures. However, they have kept the pocket fairly clean for C.J. Stroud. No sacks over the last 2 games. And that's just on the offensive side of the ball. We're not even going to get into what they've been doing on defense, taking on Coach D'Amico Ryan's swarm mentality. Over the last 6 quarters, they have only given up 23 points. The defensive line has been getting after the quarterback, stopping the run. The secondary has been making plays on the ball, and the linebackers, due to their improved play against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday, they have looked very well, making plays on the ball, communicating everything that you want to see out of that second level. Positivity is just going around the city of Houston as of right now.
Hey, you know, Coty, as we've known each other for a couple of years now, and I know it's been real rough with the Texans these last couple of years. So it is nice to see you smiling for once, talking about the Houston Texans, because it has been a minute since that has been the case. And it's funny because, like, you're talking about all the things that are, you know, looking good for the Texans. A lot of those issues are not looking great for the Falcons based off of the last couple of weeks. And their biggest story is what's going on with their quarterback. You know, Desmond Ridder has not looked good the first 2 games, really rough performances on the road against the Jacksonville Jaguars last week, in London, and then the previous week against the Detroit Lions. He was better at home in the first 2 weeks in wins over Carolina and Green Bay. He wasn't good, but he was better. Like, he was at least starting off the season in a way that you felt like, okay, this is a good starting point and we can build off of it. But it just feels like it's been regression these last 2 games for Desmond Ridder. And so the big story for the Falcons is, now that he's coming back to a more friendly environment at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, does he have a sort of bounce back and at least look like the decent quarterback that you can at least build some positivity off of from those first 2 weeks? And I know for the Falcons, that's going to be the big question for them going into this Houston matchup. And I think one of the big matchups, and we'll talk about some of those coming up, I think the way that the Falcons are going to want to try to take pressure off of Desmond Ridder. So the story next week, when I'm talking with Locked On Commanders on the crossover, is not about Desmond Ridder. The story hopefully will be, hey, let's get back to doing what we do best, which is running the football. And I think they'll have an opportunity to do that this week against the Houston Texans.
Aaron, I do want to ask you, what is different about Desmond this year, though? Because from the outside looking in, and I'm actually rooting for Desmond. I liked him coming out of Cincinnati. I was actually hoping, you know, last year, given the fact that we all knew that Davis Mills was going to be a project, I was kind of hoping maybe if Desmond Ridder is sticking around like the 4th or the 5th round, maybe you take a chance on him and start a quarterback competition. Which, by the way, after getting C.J. Stroud, you know, I'm definitely glad they ain't listen to me. But you know, I go back to the last couple of games of last season. It seems like Desmond Ridder was showing some promise, but like you mentioned, 4 games into the season, especially the last 2, things are not really clicking.
Yeah, I think, you know, the thing we talked about this week on Locked On Falcons was it did feel like the decision making has not been there. You're talking about C.J. Stroud not turning the ball over. Desmond Ridder's been turning the ball over a bunch, and he's been fortunate that he's only had, I think 3 interceptions this season. He's leading the league right now. If you look at PFF's, you know, turnover worthy plays at this point in time, he's on pace for more of those through 4 games than what Jameis Winston had in his 30 interception season. So like, that to me is really where the troubles for Desmond Ridder start. Like, he is not protecting the football and managing the game like we saw glimpses of him doing that at a reasonable level. I'm not going to say a high level, but a reasonable level that gave you hope at the end of last season that, okay, like, if we can get some pieces around this team going into the season, if he can just manage the game, if he can just kind of channel Alex Smith and be that type of player with the weapons that the Falcons have put around on the offense and the improvements they made on defense, that is a team that can be a team that can consistently win. And I just don't think we've seen that player consistently show up for the Falcons this season.
And of course, down here in the city of Houston, we have C.J. Stroud, who, I mean, 4 games in, definitely the favorite for offensive rookie of the year. But you guys have a rookie that is starting to catch my attention, Bijan Robinson. At least, how has he looked? That has to be a bright spot, right?
Look, he looks as good as advertised, right? He looks every bit as good. And I know a lot of Texans fans know all about Bijan because, he used to play down in Texas. So, he I've joked over the last couple of months, there's 2 types of people on the planet, right? There's Bijan Robinson fans and the people that haven't seen him yet. And I'm guessing a lot of folks on Locked On Falcons have certainly seen him, and I'm sure a lot of folks in Locked On Texans have seen him. So they are all Bijan Robinson fans. So he has looked as good as advertised, and we just kind of got to get him the ball a little bit more, and so that he can show off that ability in this matchup. But we'll talk about some of those key matchups as we continue today's Locked On Falcons here, guys, as well as the Locked On Texans crossover Thursday. So I'm sure you guys have $10 in your pocket right now, and you would love to find an easy way to turn that $10 into $250, and you can with Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just pick 2 or more players and pick more or less on their projected stats, and the more entries you make, the more money you can make, up to 25 times your money. And I love Prize Picks because it's quick, it's easy. Sometimes I'm sitting down about to watch a game, and like 5 minutes before kickoff, I'm like, let me go on the app of Prize Picks and put more on Bijan Robinson's rushing projections, and maybe the Locked On Texans fans might put more on Nico Collins' receiving yards projection based off of how well he's played this season. So if you want to take advantage of that quick and easy way to turn $10 into $250, just go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code LockedOnNFL in lowercase for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, Locked On Texans crossover Thursday, and we'll get into the key matches. But first, I want to tell you guys about the Locked On NFL Kickoff Live. Each and every Friday, Locked On goes live at 2 p.m. Eastern Time across every Locked On NFL YouTube channel. So if you're subscribed to Locked On Texans, if you're subscribed to Locked On Falcons, you can check it out automatically. Host Tanitra Batiste and Jarvis Davis, who Locked On Falcons fans know very well as Locked On Dolphins host Kyle Krabs, will break down every matchup on the upcoming NFL slate. You're going to get fantasy insight, betting angles, all that and more. Plus, you'll get the in-depth analysis from the local analysts like Coty, John, and myself. And all you got to do is just find it on any Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Again, that's Locked On NFL Kickoff Live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So, Coty, talking about some of the key matchups in this game. And for me, we just talked about the struggles of the Falcons offense. The one thing that hasn't been struggling for the Falcons has been their defense. And that to me kind of is the key matchup for me, going up against what has been the bright spot that's bringing that smile to your face every day on Locked On Texans, and C.J. Stroud. Can the Falcons get him on the ground? Because if you can't get him on the ground, you're going to have problems. That's the Texans, the Jaguars and Steelers both learned that. Despite all the injuries up front for the Texans offensive line that you just mentioned, Stroud hasn't been sacked the last 2 games. And it's been crazy because it's been basically a revolving door, seemingly in and out of the lineup at every offensive line position for that Texans front over the last month or so. And I'm curious where, guys like Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard, what their status is potentially if they're going to play. And obviously if the Texans do get those guys back, it's going to potentially improve that. But what I'm going to say is, while C.J. Stroud's been great this year, I have noticed a couple of times when teams have been able to get pressure on him, it can kind of speed up his process, and that can lead to him making some mistakes and being a little bit off target and all those various things. So I'm expecting the Falcons defense, which has been very competitive and allowed this team to be in every game, even if the offense is sort of holding them back in several of these games, that they're going to come out there and try to attack C.J. Stroud, try to dial up pressure. But if they throw the blitzes, that's a double-edged sword, because that's going to leave some opportunities for players like Nico Collins on the back end. And Nico has been lights out this year. And so that's going to be a challenge for this Falcon secondary. But I'm feeling like the Falcons corners, AJ Terrell, Jeff Okudah, are up for that challenge. Terrell has historically not been as great against bigger receivers like Nico Collins. And so I think that's where Jeff Okudah has been coming back at the perfect time from his injury that caused him to miss most of the summer. And he can bring that physicality that can maybe match Nico Collins. And if we can keep him contained, and hopefully we won't let Tank Dell go off like he did against Jacksonville, then I think if we can get pressure on CJ Stroud, that will be the formula for success for this Falcons team to at least keep this Texans offense in check enough that the struggling Falcons offense might be able to match blow for blow for them on Sunday. But what are some of the key matchups that you're looking at, Coty?
Well, the biggest key matchup that I'm looking at goes right along with what you just finished talking about. The Falcons defense going up against the Texans offensive line, an offensive line unit that has been banged up and continue to be banged up, because just this week we got news that Kendrick Green will be out for an extended period of time because he tore his meniscus. And I know a lot of people, especially on the Falcons side, might be saying, Kendrick Green, wasn't that the same guy Pittsburgh was laughing at on his way out when the Texans traded for him to take over at left guard? While that is true, Kendrick Green was part of the reason why this offensive line has looked pretty solid over the last 2 games. And Aaron, I do agree with you, because when you go back and you take a look at the first 2 games where there was a lot of instability, a lot of continuity issues going on with the offensive line, that's part of the reason why CJ Stroud was sacked. I think it was 11 times and was hit 19 times. And that was part of the reason why we saw this offense kind of go through their struggles throughout those first 2 games. However, the one thing that I noticed, and I had an opportunity to talk to George Fant over the last 2 weeks, the biggest thing that he kept talking about was the reason why this offensive line is starting to get things going. The reason why this offensive line has had an opportunity to keep CJ Stroud upright is the fact that they finally had some stability, and they finally was able to develop that chemistry and that continuity that your offensive line needs. Now, that was over the last 2 weeks. Last 2 weeks, the coach DeMeco Ryans had an opportunity to use the same starting 5. With Kendrick Green being taken out, plus you got to take a look at the fact that there is a possibility that Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard, especially Titus Howard, could come back. That is going to change the offensive line. Now, I know some of you guys might hear that and think to yourself, well, why would the Houston Texans offensive line get a little bit more shakier if you're adding their 2 best offensive linemen in Howard and Tunsil? Well, here's the problem. George Fant has been playing extremely well at right tackle. And as what we saw on Wednesday before they kicked us out, they was experimenting with putting Titus Howard at left guard. And for Texans fans, you guys know that was not an experiment that we liked during the 2021 campaign. So it's like, okay, what do? You have 2 pretty good, and of course, in Titus Howard case, an extremely good right tackle. You don't want to take George Fant out of the mojo he got going on. So that's going to shake up the chemistry and the camaraderie that this offensive line has built. And I'm like, okay, Titus Howard coming back, we all know he's at best at right tackle. Do you put him at left guard now, like we saw on Wednesday at Wednesday practice, and don't get the best out of him? Because yes, Titus Howard coming back is a positive, but at the same time, this is a young man who hasn't played at all this season, which means he's going to have to go through his ramp-up period, his rusty period. So it's like, not only are you not going to put him at the position that he's best at, you're going to put him at the position where he's, if we're being 100, the worst at. So that's my biggest concern once again, like it is every single week. How's this depleted offensive line is going to hamper an Atlanta Falcons defense that's been pretty good? However, on the flip side of things, I also look at this from a standpoint, can the Houston Texans defense, especially their front 4, continue to get after the quarterback and continue to make them uncomfortable? I just said it. I'm rooting for Desmond Ridder. However, for the Houston Texans to win this game, they have to make sure that they make quarterbacks uncomfortable. And that's part of the reason why we've seen them go on this 2-game winning streak. Yes, I understand Kenny Pickett, that young man is not the Kenny Pickett that we saw throughout preseason. We thought without a shadow of a doubt we was going to see at least a top 15 quarterback, and he has looked like a 10 worst quarterback in the league. However, the one thing that I did notice when they played against the Jacksonville Jaguars, they was able to get after Trevor Lawrence. And we saw a totally different Trevor Lawrence that did not look comfortable, that couldn't go through all his reads and progressions. And that's part of the reason why the Houston Texans was able to lead Jacksonville with a victory. And I even go back to week 1 against the Baltimore Ravens. I understand they lost, they didn't score a touchdown or whatever the case might be. However, Lamar Jackson did not look that good against the Houston Texans. Why? Because that swarm defensive mentality, they had an opportunity to go after Lamar Jackson, and that's part of the reason why we thought we had a chance, but unfortunately the offense wasn't able to put any points on the board. So, if this offensive line can continue to protect CJ, especially with the potential new additions that we're going to see, and if this defense continue to make it uncomfortable for the opposing team's quarterback, I definitely believe that the Houston Texans can come away with a win. I definitely think the Houston Texans can leave Atlanta with a victory.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And so, the Falcons are going to be circling that left guard position to see what the Texans do. Because that's where Grady Jarrett usually lines up, and so whoever lines up there might have a day. But yeah, you're right. I think the Falcons' offensive line has not been great in pass protection this year. I can't remember exactly. They're up there in terms of sacks allowed this season. They've given up a bunch over the last couple of weeks, and you've seen teams like Detroit and Jacksonville who went into the week thinking we need to get after the quarterback. They were able to get after the quarterback and get a couple of sacks. I think the Falcons have given up 11 sacks over the last 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken.
Ooh.
So yeah, it's not been pretty. So I think the key for the Falcons is going to be, hey, let's avoid that problem by running the football down the Texans' throat. And I'm curious, Coty, before we get into sort of our final looks at this game and sort of ways that this team can win, how has the Texans' run defense looked to your eyes? I know the stats don't necessarily paint a rosy picture for their run defense through 4 games. What are your thoughts on it?
Texans run defense has been better. I mean, you asking a guy who has watched the Texans run defense give up an average of like 155 yards over the last 2 seasons. So anything will look better this season. And the one thing that I would say about the Texans run defense is the improvements that we see. It's part of the reason why you went up and traded for Will Anderson Jr. Will Anderson Jr., I know if you take a look at his numbers, especially his quote-unquote sack numbers, because some people think that's all a DN is supposed to do is just rush up the middle and get a whole bunch of sacks. But Will Anderson Jr. has completely changed the trajectory of this defensive front. And whether it's getting after the quarterback and allowing that's opened up holes and stuff for his teammates to get the sack or whatever the case might be, but stopping the run and everything else in between, Will Anderson Jr. has been the difference maker into why I look at the Texans run defense and say, you know what? I know Bijan Robinson is still going to have, let's say, a good game, but he's not going to have a phenomenal game because Bijan is getting to that point where it's like, okay, if you could just contain him, he's still going to do his thing. Just contain him enough so the Falcons offense can still struggle a little bit. But, I truly believe that when you take a look at the addition of Will Anderson Jr., along with the improvements that we've seen out of John Grenard, especially out of John Grenard over these first 4 games, the Texans run defense every single week, it get better and better and better. Yes, they have given up a couple big plays here and there, especially when you go back and take a look at the game that they just had against the Pittsburgh Steelers. You go back and take a look at that. I think it was the first or the second drive of the second half that the Steelers had. There was a moment where it was like, okay, come on, run defense. You guys got to get it going again. But once they was able to regroup and everything, the Steelers didn't have no chance.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see if the Falcons have a chance at home. It's weird to say that after the 2-0 start where the Texans seemingly are going into this game as sort of the team that a lot of people expect. But, our friends over at FanDuel don't quite agree with that, with the Falcons being favored by 2 points heading into to this home game. And you guys should definitely snap back into the action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers, it's a great time to head on over to FanDuel because you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And you can bet on a wide range of things, spreads, player props, over, under, so much more. So all you got to do to take advantage is visit FanDuel.com/locked-on, and you can kick off this NFL season now that we're a month into it. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. Guys, I want to tell you that this episode of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Texans Crossover Thursday is sponsored by BetterHelp. And sometimes you might find yourself lying awake late at night with some racing thoughts. And a great way to make those thoughts go away is to talk through them. And therapy gives you a place to do that. You've heard me talk about therapy on Locked On Falcons and how much it has benefited me over the past year. And that is thanks to BetterHelp. Therapy has taught me that I need to understand that I can only control what I can control. I can't control if the Falcons win a game, but I can control the quality of this Locked On podcast. And I've gotten feedback from the Locked On Falcons listeners over the past year that the podcast quality has gotten better. And again, you can thank BetterHelp for that. And so if you're thinking of starting therapy, I cannot recommend BetterHelp enough. Give it a try. It's entirely online. It's much more affordable than traditional offline therapy. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire. You'll get matched with a licensed therapist within 48 hours. You'll switch therapists at any time if you need to for no additional charge. So let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/locked-on today, and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked-on. So, guys, as we wrap up today's Crossover Thursday, I want to give a special shout out again to the everydayers here for Locked On Falcons and Locked On Texans. And we're going to break down sort of the ways that each of these teams can win and maybe give our final score predictions. For me, Coty, when I look at this matchup, I think it's a similar matchup kind of to what the Falcons faced in week 2 against the Packers, where the Falcons were able to run the ball over 200 yards rushing in that game. And I would like to see the Falcons have a similar day to try to keep that Texans offense at bay on the sideline by controlling the clock. And when the Texans offense does get on the field, if they can pressure C.J. Stroud, and sort of prevent some of the explosive plays that they've given up the last couple of weeks, that the Texans have had the last couple of weeks to guys like Nico Collins and Tank Dell. I think that will be enough to keep this Texans offense in check so that even the struggling Falcons offense can match them. And basically, it's kind of a formula to kind of win a game 20-17. And that's going to be tough against this Texans offense. But I think the Falcons have the way to do that. I think it's a very winnable game for the Falcons if they can do that. All those things, run the football, hopefully slow down CJ Stroud enough that they can really apply that pressure late in the game. And so I think the Falcons have the capability with Bijan Robinson, with Tyler Algier, to absolutely punch this Texans team in the mouth. But because of the way they've played the last couple of weeks, I need to see it first before I really buy into it. So I do expect this to be a close game going into the fourth quarter. And the Falcons in the first 2 weeks at home were able to, finish those games strong and win those games. The last 2 weeks, they have not necessarily done that. So if I'm predicting the score, again, I think the Falcons can win this, but I'm going to go with the Texans 24, Falcons 20, just because the Texans have been a little bit better over the last couple of weeks than the Falcons have been.
Sounds good. I also have it to be a close game as well. I have the Houston Texans winning 21-17. I think the one thing for the Houston Texans that I'm looking at the most is just consistency. Going into this season, I didn't have them looking this good, especially CJ Stroud, because look, I have faith in his coaching staff, have faith in the young players, definitely always have faith in CJ. But the one thing that I was always looking at the 2023 season is a season of development and a season of growth. And even though they have looked really good over these last 2 games, the one thing that keeps playing in the back of my mind, this is still a season of growth. This is still a season of development. And yes, things look promising in the city of Houston. However, there are small little intangibles I want to see this team check off, and consistency is one of them. I talked about how good this offensive line has looked, even with the injuries, even though, I know whoever they're going to add come Sunday. We talked to Coach D'Amico Ryans, and he didn't give out, no word of whether or not Laramie Tunsil or Titus Howard will be back, but he did say that they're going to put the best starting 5 out there. So I'm like, okay, whoever's going to be out there, they got to make sure that they keep the pocket clean for CJ, because I think that's going to be the biggest factor into whether or not the Texans can go inside Atlanta and pick up a victory. I haven't had an opportunity to talk about the wide receiving core, but this wide receiving core has been a complete shock to all of us. A lot of us didn't think that C.J. Stroud had enough help with the wide receiving core. There were some wide receivers, and I'm one of the guys that's guilty of this. I was really big on Noah Brown. And where has Noah Brown been after the very first game? On IR, which has allowed him to open up a door for Tank Dell. And Tank Dell has been a big surprise for this organization. However, this is game number 5, and I want to see if Nico Collins can continue to be wide receiver number 1. I want to see if Tank Dell can go out there and be a consistent playmaker. I want Robert Woods to go out there and be a safety blanket for CJ. Like, I definitely want to just see this team just stay consistent, and I think if they do that, they're definitely going to have an opportunity to record their 3rd win of the 2023 campaign.
Well, Coty, I liked the Texans wide receivers, maybe probably more than most, but maybe because I was just looking at the Panthers wide receivers that Bryce Young was going to throw to, and I'm like, he ain't throwing to nobody. At least CJ Stroud got a couple of guys. Nico Collins is kind of good. Robert Woods is kind of good. Tank Dell's kind of good. And as you said, they've been better than I think a lot of people, even I thought they would be. But we'll see if the Falcons can slow them down. And we'll see if the Falcons can get their run game. We'll see if CJ Stroud can keep, this momentum going and continue to run away with the offensive rookie of the year honors, or maybe Bijan Robinson can close the gap a little bit with a big game this weekend. But that's going to do it for us here, guys, on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Texans. We'll be back, of course, all week long with more content covering this upcoming Week 5 matchup. So continue to make us your first listen, and of course, always check out the Locked On NFL podcast as your second listen.